Okay, you're dismissed to your classes. And my class is in Joshua chapter 10. If you've had the schedule, I told you this a couple weeks ago, but I didn't repeat it. And so if you think that we're going to go from Joshua chapter 1 and verse 18 to Joshua chapter 12 and verse 24 tonight, you're going to be disappointed. We're actually in chapter 10 and verse 28, so neither of those numbers were right in the beginning of it, and then we'll go through chapter 12 as well. By the way, two things really quickly while they're getting out of here. I wore this long sleeve shirt because it's cold out there, and now it's hot in here. It was hot to me. So if I fall over, it's because I wore a long sleeve shirt. Or you may have noticed there's a gigantic fly in here. It's about the size of a Cessna. If he hits me in the head, and I might fall off from that too.
Roll up your sleeves.
Yeah, he did hit me during the announcement. Did you see that? He flew in and hit me in the head. Okay, Joshua chapter 10. Interesting enough, let me talk about our chronology again before I go further, before I introduce that. But you remember what's been happening is Israel is now in the land of Canaan, and it's the second generation, right? The first generation died off in the wilderness, all those 20 and above, because of the failure at Kadesh Barnea of faith. And so they spent 38 more years out there, 40 years in total, 1 year for every day that the spies were in the land of Canaan. And then God said, okay, it's time to move and take the land. And so that last year before they went in, several events happened. Miriam died, Aaron died, and then at the end Moses died. But they also had some battles. They had the battles with Sihon and Og, which were powerful nations that had not been defeated, and God defeated them. Then they crossed over the Jordan River, and they went to Gilgal, and they set up that altar from the stones that were in the Jordan, and they kept coming back to that as they're doing these campaigns in the land. They kept coming back to Gilgal. That's their foundation. That's their reminder and their connection, as it were, to God. Because back in the wilderness, you remember, he kept moving with them, right? There was a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, and his presence would settle on the most holy place or the tabernacle when they're out in the wilderness, so they could literally walk out of their tent in the mornings and see a representation of the presence of God. But when they got into Canaan, that ceases, and so now they have the ark and they have Gilgal, and that is their place where they're kind of connecting to God. So they go to Jericho. God proves to him that he's the one winning these battles by giving them the plan just to march, right? He knocks down the walls. All that city belongs to him. They don't ask God next. They forget to ask God or whatever, and they just go to fight Ai and lose because they didn't take care to make sure that everything was done right at Ai. So God straightens that out, and then he gives them another plan, and they go to Ai, and it's not a forward-thinking strength plan. It's a you get them out of the city, and I'll drive them out of the city, and then you'll just go in and take it with no battle whatsoever. And that's what happened. And there was a battle, but it wasn't for the city. It was to judge those or bring punishment to those that God had judged. But Ai does belong to them, right? God told them they could take from Ai for their blessings. And then we had the failure where they, again, don't go talk to God. And the Gibeonites show up, or the people from Gibeon show up, and they lie to them and tell them, look, we came from a long ways away. We're not from here. We came from a long ways away because we heard what your God's doing, and we want to be a part of this. And they lied. They didn't go to God and say, well, is this right? And they believed the lie and entered into a covenant with these people to allow them to stay. And God was not pleased with that, was he? Okay. And the next thing that happened, we started on this last Sunday, was that agreement that they had entered into caused them to have to go to war. Now, the point that I made from that class, if you were here Sunday, is even when we mess up, if we turn back to God, God can use even a difficult situation and make something good come out of it. And what he did in that situation is the commitment that Joshua and Israel had to the Gibeonites, God used it to gather together all these nations that were now mad at the Gibeonites, and the leader of Jerusalem leading all of this, the king of Jerusalem, and they all come to war against Gibeon, not against Joshua, against Gibeon, but Joshua's now got to go protect them. And God used that to make a quick, if you will, capture of the southern part of the land of Canaan. So what we're in the middle of is, and where we're starting tonight in verse 28 of chapter 10, is how quickly God gave them all of the southern campaign. And he'll even bring it up in the text tonight that he just did it all so quickly as one. So that's where we'll be. But we're going to start in verse 28. But before that, I want to say something. I've grouped these together in the schedule because there's a lot of it that we'll just kind of read. I won't have a lot of comment about it because this is a section that really the big picture is more important than the small details. There are a lot of times in the text that I'll read one verse and talk for 10 minutes. And so there are little details that I try to bring out in the text. Give me just a second. Maybe I swallowed that fly. Little things I try to bring out of the text that creates an intimate picture of what's happening in the account. But in this text, it's more important to see the big picture. And here's why I'm emphasizing this. If you're at home and you're reading and you're going through a Bible reading plan, I don't know who does that. I know that some do. And if that's you, then when you're going through the book of Joshua, it kind of reads like Genesis in that it's kind of a storyline, right? I mean, you see them coming into the land, and Moses has died, and then they go to battle, and then they go to battle, and then they go to battle, and it's just kind of reading through a storyline, if you will. That's not why God recorded it, but that's what it feels like. And then you get to this section, 10:28 through the end of chapter 12, verse 24, and it doesn't read like a storyline anymore. All of a sudden, what it reads like is, it reads a lot like a genealogy. How many of you have started your Bible readings and started in Matthew and went, yeah, I'm going to skip this part? Because so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so begot, right? The son of, the son of, the son of, and so you just skip all those names. Well, that's what happens here because what you're reading about is, well, Joshua defeated this king, and then he defeated this king, and then he defeated this king, and then he defeated this king. And in chapter 12, there are 31 kings listed that Joshua defeats or God defeats for Joshua. And you're reading that and you're thinking, well, I don't really need to spend so much time on that. So it's more important to me that we get the big picture rather than to stop and get all the details. So I'm going to give you the big picture before we start reading tonight. This section is, in my opinion, the most significant section of the book of Joshua. And it's not because the river parted. It's not because the walls of Jericho fell. It's not because they learned about following God. Thank you. It's not because Joshua gave some great sermon that he'll do at the end. It's not any of that at all. Here's what it is. It's one big section that says this: God always keeps his promises. And he does it even in detail. And it doesn't matter whether it's the way you thought it ought to happen. It doesn't matter if it's when you thought it ought to happen. That's what you're talking about with trust a while ago. It's not any of those things. But here's what it is connected to: when you do what God asks you to do. So I want to point way back, and I know I'm summarizing, but that's just because I have a lot to read tonight instead of to break down. I want to go backwards. God promised them before they ever came out of Egypt that he was going to bring them to this land, right? In fact, God promised them before they ever went to Egypt that he was going to give them this land. That's what Joseph had told them when he was dying. When God visits you and takes you out of here, don't leave my bones here. And so when they left Egypt, somewhere, they still got them. Somewhere they've got the bones of Joseph with them in this journey. So they know this promise. So much so that when they crossed the Red Sea and God brought the waters in on the Egyptians and they turned around and they sang the song of Moses, they didn't just sing about God overthrowing the horse and the rider in the sea. They also sang about these nations where they were going who were going to be afraid of them. That's 40 years before they ever get here. And they've had this confirmation all throughout their time in the wilderness when they would struggle and fail and complain and whatever else happened, and God would punish them. And the reminder was always do what God asked you to do, and he'll fulfill his promises. And then they get to Jericho, and Rahab the harlot says to the spies, first thing, you know all these people in this town are afraid of you because of what's been happening out there, and they know what happened all the way back in Egypt. And that even came up with the Gibeonites, didn't it, when they lied? It's because they knew all of these. God said he'd send his fear before them, and it happened, right? Okay, well, chapter 10, chapter 11, I'm not even in the right place. Chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12 is God saying, I want you to look at this. I did every single thing I told you I would do in detail. And it happened when you did what I asked you to do. So I would think back to 38 years earlier when their ancestors, the previous generation, sent the spies into the land. This very land saw these very people and came back and said, we can't do it. Could God have done it then?
Yes.
What stopped him?
The 10 spies.
Yeah, their lack of faith. The spies caused the other people to lose their faith. Everybody gave up, and God couldn't fulfill his promise. What's different this time is they did what he asked them to do. So, again, I'm probably going to read extended sections, at least in chapter 10 and then chapter 12. I might slow down a little bit in chapter 11. We'll see. But let's start in chapter 10 and verse 28. On that day Joshua took Makkedah and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them, all the people who were in it. He let none remain. He also did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. I do want to say this. That's going to kind of be a repetitive phrase right there. Not only that, he utterly destroyed them, but also that the king was destroyed. And I do want to emphasize a couple things quickly with that. One of them is, why is all this destruction happening?
Because they must get rid of the people that are in
the people that are in the land had become wicked to the point that God's patience had ended. He told them. He'd taken them to the land when the iniquity of the people is there, when it's reached that point of judgment. So this is God's judgment, and he's just using them to do it and giving them the land. And so this judgment has to happen. Now, why do you suppose they would emphasize the king in these statements that we just read and the ones we're going to read? What's different about him than anybody else? Yeah, oftentimes what would happen in these particular kinds of battles, you would destroy the soldiers, but the king you would take captive because you could continue to show your power over the king. Well, God doesn't want them depending on their power, displaying their power at all. He wants them following him, right? So the king's destroyed like all the people. All right, 29. Then Joshua passed from Makkedah and all Israel with him to Libnah, and they fought against Libnah. And the Lord also delivered it and its king into the hand of Israel. He struck it and all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword. He let none remain in it, but did to it as its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Joshua passed from Libnah and all Israel with him to Lachish, and they encamped against it and fought against it. And the Lord delivered Lachish into the hand of Israel, who took it on the second day, and struck it and all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, according to all that he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people until he left him none remaining. From Lachish Joshua passed to Eglon and all Israel with him, and they encamped against it and fought against it. And they took it on that day and struck it with the edge of the sword, all the people who were in it, until he utterly destroyed that day, according to all that he'd done to Lachish. And Joshua went up from Eglon and all Israel with him to Hebron, and they fought against it. And they took it and struck it with the edge of the sword, its king, all its cities, and all the people who were in it. He left none remaining, according to all that he had done to Eglon, but utterly destroyed it and all the people who were in it. And Joshua returned, and all Israel with him to Debir, and they fought against it, and he took it, and its king, and all its cities, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and utterly destroyed all the people who were in it. He left none remaining as he had done to Hebron, so he did to Debir and its king, as he had done also to Libnah and its king. So, well, before I read 40, I want to ask, talk to me about the consistencies we just read.
They killed them all.
Yeah. All Israel's involved. They strike them with the edge of the sword. They utterly destroy all of them, including the prime captor to display your power, which is the king. So all Israel's involved, and they do everything God asks them to do. And the reason I think that's significant in the way that it's pointed out here is because that's what they've been struggling with. You know, that's what happened. That's what happened at Ai. They didn't know what God wanted them to do because they didn't ask. And that's what happened with the Gibeonites. They didn't know that these people were lying to them because they didn't ask. And now they've figured out, look, we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to depend upon God. You remember I talked about those three battles, Jericho, Ai, and then against these people with the Gibeonites, the early part of what we were just reading here. The early part of that when they were assisting the Gibeonites. You remember I talked about how every single account highlights, emphasizes the fact that God's the one doing this? The marching? God did that, right? They marched, but God took the walls down, right? Yeah? The running, fleeing, the big army fleeing, and everybody pursues, nobody stays behind. God's the one that did that, right? And then when they fight against the enemies of the Gibeonites, or those that are attacking the Gibeonites, wasn't it a bunch of hailstones? In fact, didn't the text tell us that there were more who died from the hailstones that God sent than what Israel did? And the emphasis was they've got to learn to depend upon God. They don't have to have some great battle plan. They have to depend upon God. So whatever he tells them to do, they do it, and they do it all. Now, the application of that is us. Look, I don't know that we're any different than they were. I think in most cases we're not. But I wonder if we're not different in this regard. We have to know why for some reason. You know, God says do this, and we're like a 5-year-old saying why? Well, because this is better for you. Why? Well, you're going to live a better life because of this. Why?
The Bible says so.
And eventually we've got to get to the place where our faith says, look, I'd like to have the answer why, and I might study enough to where one day I find the answer to why. But here's the thing. I know the who. And if I know the who, then faith means I'm going to trust that God knows the why. And whether I ever learn it, I have faith in the who. And that's where they had to get. In order to conquer the land, they had to get to that place where they could say, I don't know why, but I know who. And if God says this is what we're going to do, well, this is what we're going to do. And that's why what we're reading about in this particular section of the text is nothing but conquest. I mean, they have struggled a lot, not just out in the wilderness, but since they've been in the land. The ones that had enough faith to cross the Jordan River and go into the land and enter into the covenant again has still struggled, haven't they? Twice in 3 battles. And in fact, if you count what Achan did at Jericho, really 3 times in 3 battles. And finally, they got to the place where they said, yeah, I think it's time we do what God said. And they don't have any more failures. Now, what we're reading about here is the south. In fact, let's just start again in verse 40, and you'll see that. So Joshua conquered all the land, the mountain country, and the south, and the lowlands, and the wilderness slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. And Joshua conquered them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, even as far as Gibeon. All these kings and their land Joshua took at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. And then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Now, we read through all those battles, and it didn't sound like he meant, he didn't say here when he said he conquered them all at one time, he didn't mean that all of them came to battle at one time, and then he just, you may not have noticed this in some of the old martial arts type of movies, when you got like Bruce Lee. Anybody here ever watched old Bruce Lee movies or something? Have you noticed that when Bruce Lee gets attacked by 20 guys, they attack him one at a time? All 19 of them stand there until he knocks that guy out, and then the next guy comes in and he knocks that guy out. And, when you read this and you have Joshua saying that God through Joshua saying that he defeated all these people at one time, that doesn't mean they're all circled around and all that. What it means is, what he had done is go from Gilgal to Jericho and to Gilgal, to Ai and then Gilgal, and then he went up to protect the Gibeonites, and then Gilgal. But here's the thing, what we talked about Sunday, about even when we mess up, God has the ability, if we turn to him and trust him and follow him, to use even a bad situation. And that covenant that they entered into with the Gibeonites that caused all these nations to attack, God used to finish it. And so all those that came up, God defeated them, and then he said, now Joshua, go get the rest of them. And all that south area, he just marched around and marched around and marched around and destroyed all of them before he ever went back to Gilgal. So that was one, campaign, if you will. They left Gilgal, they fought with the Gibeonites, they destroyed all and took all of the land in the south, and then they went back to Gilgal. Because that's where God was, right? I mean, not in a literal sense, but where their connection to God was. Which takes us to chapter 11. Now, I'll ask you just in case, since I did that very quickly. Do you have questions that I don't have to answer? No? Did you get the point of that section? That's a good point. Everybody that didn't do what God said died. Yep. Okay, chapter 11. Maybe I'll slow down a little bit in this one. It came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, I probably pronounced these wrong, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were from the north, in the mountains, in the plains south of Chinnereth, in the lowland, and in the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east, in the west. Listen to these names: the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Hermon in the land of Mizpah. Doesn't that sound a whole lot like the names that were in the Song of Moses and in other times when God had promised them? All their lives, the people of Israel that are from this generation have heard these people. And now they have rapidly taken out the south, and the ones that are left are the ones that God's already mentioned to them and said, hey, I'm going to take care of all these too. You think their faith should be growing? Think they should be learning, hey, when we depend upon God, he does exactly what he told us, right? So now they're headed to the north. So they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore in multitude, with very many horses and chariots. Let's stop there. I think that you guys know, I think that most of you know how I operate, how I function in my studies. If I have notes up here, it's because there are things that I'm afraid I'm going to forget, and I need to keep these notes so I cover them. I don't like to use notes. I don't like to read somebody else's material. I like to stay in the text. Now, I've got a library. I'll read what people have written, but it's never first. I'm always going to go to the text first because the text helps us to understand that. So I would suggest to you, I did a sermon recently on artificial intelligence. I'm going to get off track just a second. I know that some of you will use that in your work or even in your homes, artificial intelligence. I think it's a great tool, but it's also a really powerful tool of the devil. I saw it just recently. There was a member here that was studying with a friend of theirs, and in studying with their friend there, they took the Bible and opened it up and talked about the plan of salvation, and that person they were studying with went home and asked AI if that was true, and AI spit out the same old garbage that everybody in the denominational world teaches. I'll tell you a secret. I have tried multiple artificial intelligence platforms, ChatGPT, Claude AI, Google AI, and I've asked that question, and they always start in the same man-made place. However, if you follow up whatever, or if you begin with a question that says something like, using the Bible and only the Bible, what can I say? The answer to the question, what must I do to be saved? Sunday morning sermon. And you know what you'll get? You'll get the truth, if you insist that it stays with the Bible. So I say all that to say this. That's the way I approach the text. I want to stay with the Scriptures. Does that mean that outside sources are not useful? No. Okay. I said all that just to give you this. I have an outside source for this verse. Josephus. Josephus was not an inspired writer. He recorded history. Josephus tells us, when we read about Ai, we read about a small army, right? Even Jericho wasn't that huge. It was just a big fortified city. When we read about this army here, Josephus tells us that they had over 300,000 soldiers. It's a big army, right? Now, do we know anything about Israel's army?
Yeah.
What do we know? They've got over 600,000, right? So you start to say, well, that's still double, right? So it still shouldn't be a battle. However, we also just know a couple other things about Israel's army, and that is, they're not warriors. They came from slaves in Egypt, and they've been out here in the wilderness for their whole life. Their only war experience is what they've been getting since they've been approaching Canaan and in Canaan, right? And those plans have not been about how their skill effectively shows up on the battlefield, right? Okay, so that's 600,000. You might need more than that. And here's the other side of it. What we just learned about the 300,000 is they have horses and chariots. Is that important? Yes. Yeah, that's basically modern day warfare tanks. They have tanks, and Israel's running around on foot. Now, before I say more about that, I want to read a little bit more and come back to it. And when all these kings had met together, and by the way, the north is obviously following the same tactic that the south followed. Worked well in the south, didn't it? No? Okay. They came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. But, that's a contrast word, but the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow about this time I'll deliver all of them slain before Israel. And then he adds something. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So Joshua knows, here comes this army, and all right, this is a little more extensive than what we've been dealing with down here in the south. What we've been dealing with here in the south has not been much, and we had to have God to do that, so we know we got to have God, and now they're gathering this huge army, and they have horses and chariots, and now he says to them, don't be afraid. And I would point out again, just like I try to always remember to do, anytime God told somebody, don't be afraid, it's because from man's perspective, it looked like they had a reason to be afraid. If this powerful, rugged, well-equipped army is coming up against you, from man's perspective, you might have a reason to be afraid, right? And God says, don't be afraid. Tomorrow, you'll win the battle. Now, that's about they've been faithful up to this point, right? And then he adds something. This is just like Jericho. At Jericho, God said, everything belongs to me. Don't take anything. I'll give you the battle, but when you go in, everything there belongs to me. Now he says, tomorrow, these people will be dead. I'll defeat them, and you'll win this battle, and all these people from the north. But burn the chariots and hamstring the horses. How is that like Jericho?
They're not to keep the horses and the chariots.
Yeah. Deuteronomy chapter 17, when Moses is nearing the end of his life, they're in the last year before he dies, before Joshua takes over, and he repeats the law to them, right? We call it a second stating of the law. And in Deuteronomy chapter 17, one of the things that he told them is, when they get into the land, they are not to multiply the horses and the chariots among them. Why? They cannot depend upon their own strength. They have to depend upon God. I'll tell you this much. It does not matter how many horses and chariots they get. They're not going to take Canaan without God, right? And so what he tells them is, when you win this battle, don't take the elements of war from these nations that you're defeating and make yourself stronger so that the next battle, you'll be more confident in yourself. Stay where you are, stay trusting in me, and I'll finish the task. So faith brought them here. When they win this battle, they have to keep walking by faith, don't they? I fully believe that one of the greatest challenge, I'm having a rough night. The flies hitting me in the head, I'm biting my tongue, coughing. Yeah, it's hot. Yeah. I fully believe, don't let me forget you, Kurt, but I want to finish this thought before I bite my tongue again. I fully believe that one of the greatest elements that Satan uses against us today is our blessings. God blesses us in some way, and Satan tempts us to abuse what God has blessed us with. He tempts us to use it in some way that God has not approved of its use. It's not when we're at war that we struggle. It's not when Satan's attack us that we struggle. Do we struggle then? Yes, we do struggle then. But those are times we know we have to have God. When you're walking around a fortified Jericho, you know you've got to have God. But if you got all the chariots and horses in your army, all the blessings, I can handle tomorrow without God, right? And Satan uses that temptation to pull us away from our faith. If I can depend upon me, I don't have to have faith in God. I got faith in me. Israel's at a place where God is pushing them over and over and over again, not just to have faith, but to make that faith grow. Because once they drive all these people out of the land and they've got the blessings, they're going to start trusting themselves.
Well, what equipment, what acts of war, things, tools do they have? They don't have any tools.
Israel?
Yeah, they had the trumpets for Jericho.
Yeah.
But that doesn't.
Well, they do have swords.
Do they?
They do have swords because they killed them with the edge of the sword.
Right.
Yeah, they do have swords. At some point, I know they're going to have archers. I don't know that they have them yet, but they might. I don't know. And things like that. But still yet, if you were a footman and you're going up against somebody that's in a chariot with the horses, you're in trouble. And that's just a greater element of war. And they have to depend upon God. Okay, let's go back to the text. So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom. So they didn't wait, and they attacked them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to greater Sidon, to the brook Mizraphoth, and to the valley of Mizpah eastward. That valley is going to be important at other events later on in the Old Testament history. They attacked them until they left none of them remaining. See, they've been faithful, right? So Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hung string their horses and burned their chariots with fire. He did exactly what God told him to do. Joshua, Moses has died. My servant Moses has died. Be strong and courageous to do all that I ask you to do. Took him a while to get there. He did get there, didn't he? Because you and I both know that this is the exact opposite attitude that Achan had. Achan went into Jericho, and what he told Joshua when God narrowed it down and said, here's the guy, what he told Joshua was, look, I saw these things, and I wanted them, and I took them. Does anybody believe that nobody in Israel saw these chariots and these horses and thought, you know what? I bet we could use those. I guarantee you they thought it. I would venture to say Joshua thought it. But then Joshua said, what God told us to do was this. And he did it. That takes courage, doesn't it? It takes strength. And you know what? It puts you in a place where God can fulfill his promises. Keep reading. Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms. So now he says, I'm going to go for the person that was over all this. We're going to eliminate all this, be God's judgment. And they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. And then he burned Hazor with fire. So all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Notice this was not new. This is what God told Moses. And this is what Moses challenged Joshua with. This is not new. All the way back in the wilderness, it was do what God says, he fulfills his promises. Don't, and you struggle. Moses says, I have set before you life and death. Choose life. Isn't that the strangest statement? Keep reading. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the livestock the children of Israel took as booty for themselves. But they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing, as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant. So Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all the Lord had commanded Moses. So I want you to notice what we just read. First off, we read that God commanded Moses. Moses passed that command on to Joshua, and Joshua did it. But we also read that God destroyed all these people by judgment, but he didn't forget about what Israel needed. He gave them some of these cities for their existence. Not necessarily where they were going to live, but for their livestock, for their food. I mean, they're not getting manna every day anymore, are they? And what they got today is not going to last forever, is it? Probably is expiring now. And so God gives them more. Couldn't he have given them all of them? Every city? Why didn't he? They wouldn't depend on him anymore. God gave them what they needed, and they continued to depend upon him. Now there's more, and I'm going to run out of time, so I've got to get to part of it anyway. Joshua took all this land, the mountain country, all the south, all the land of Goshen, the lowland of Jordan, the mountains of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak and the ascent to Seir, even as far as Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon. Below Mount Hermon, he captured all their kings and struck them down and killed them. Joshua made war a long time with all these kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle. They learned their lesson, didn't they? Yeah. Not one. They're not fooled another time. I doubt that the Gibeonites, the Hivites in Gibeon, were the only ones that tried to fool them, don't you? Yeah. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, and that they might receive no mercy, but they might destroy them as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, you read this and say, it was Israel's heart that's hard. You read it wrong. The hearts of these people opposing Israel are what's hard. God hardened their hearts. And how did he do that? Well, they heard what God did out here and what God did out here and what God did out here, and these people said, we can't win on this. Let's get everybody together and go at war, all of us together. Only time all these enemies united. And God hardened their hearts to get them all united so they'd go to war and make this easier for Joshua and his people. And there's more. At that time, Joshua came and cut off the Anakim. The Anakim, that's the giants. That's the exact same people that the 12 spies went in the land and saw, and 10 of them came back and said, there are giants in the land. The Anakim are there. Giants. We can't take them. Listen to it again. At that time, Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza and Gath and in Ashdod. So the very people that the spies were afraid of and said, we look like grasshoppers in their sight and we can't take it, God just took. We don't even read it was a battle. We don't even know what kind of battle happened. We don't read as much about marching around Jericho. I do want to point something out, though. It's specific, these places that he mentions, these giants remained around Israel, because one of them happens to be the exact place where a specific giant's going to come from later. Goliath. Yep. And that's where David's going to also run off and act like he's lost his mind and try to protect himself from Saul. So it's significant that these people have remained here, because God's going to use him later to show his power through David. See how God's providence works? You don't see it when it's happening, but we know the next account, and we can look back and see this, can't we? Okay. I'm running out of time here, so let me just say this. Well, let's just read the rest of that chapter anyway. So Joshua took the whole land. So Joshua took part of the land. Is that how yours reads? No? Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said to Moses, and Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes, and then the land rested from war. God fulfills his promises. So here's a question. Could he have done this 38 years earlier? Yes. And what stopped him? Their lack of faith. Application, I would say this. If he's not working in this church and in our lives, could it be not because he can't fulfill his promises, but that I'm not allowing him to do it because I'm not living up to the faith that he called me to live up to? Could that be the case? I don't always have to know the why. What I have to know is the who. If I know the who, then I can trust him for the why, can't I? Okay, now when you get into... Are you pointing at somebody? Oh, I thought my wife pointed at somebody. I never look at her. I thought she was pointing at somebody. Okay, let me just summarize chapter 12 real quick. Chapter 12 just says this. These are the 31 kings. 31 kings. He says he defeated this guy, won. He defeated this guy, won. He defeated... And the reason I want to emphasize that is this. Does anybody know? Here's a good question. Somebody would know this answer. One will, but he's not here tonight. He's gone. Undefeated NFL teams? Miami Dolphins did it. What year would that be? 1973? 1972. Undefeated. That's a big deal, isn't it? Okay. 31 battles Joshua fought. How many failed? Trick question.
Yeah, right.
One.
Again,
One failed. Ai failed. And then he went back to battle and did it the right way and didn't fail, right? 31-0 is what you might say, when they did what God asked them to do. That's not quite a football team, but I would expect if it would be man's battles, you might lose a few of those, don't you think? Did Israel do that well after they got in the land and had kings and armies and all that? Did they do that well, 31-0? No, they did not. Okay, let's close with a prayer. Father, we are so thankful that we can be in your presence tonight, and we're so thankful, Father, that these accounts and these chapters strengthen our faith, that we know that you are a promise-keeping God. We pray, Father, that we will have the strength and the courage and the faith to walk with you, even when we do not understand the why. Help us, Father, to know who you are. Help us, Father, to trust in you. Forgive us where we fail you. In Christ's name, amen.